All right, hi everyone. This is just a quick addendum to the last migration video. Sorry, my dogs are making noise. Uh, this shouldn't be, hopefully about 10 minutes. So let's go ahead and get started. Actually, hang on just a bit. Okay, I think they stopped. The first thing we're going to look at is some of the big migration from the past, and the one we're going to look at is colonization. And colonization is when several of the European countries started expanding between 1400 and 1700, and this includes Columbus coming over to the Americas. So you can see it's the Spanish, Portuguese, French, Dutch, and the British. Those were kind of the major countries that were expanding and colonizing other parts of the world. And you can see based on the colors here, where those countries had their influence. So uh, these are countries, maps of countries that have been under European control. So you can see here in 1880, if we take a look at Africa, Africa was colonized heavily. In 1880, you can see where those countries, which countries were colonized. And then by 1913, that really they took over the whole continent in terms of colonization. So anyway, and you can see over on this map over here, countries that have been under European control, colonized or controlled by Europe. So most of the map, really. So let's see. So some of the effects of colonialization. So, and this is European colonialization. You can see over here, this is just a depiction of Columbus coming over with Native Americans and a little cartoon here that says land rights lawyer. Obviously, Native Americans were here first. And so, when the Europeans got here, uh, they started taking the land for themselves. And so, uh, we all are familiar with that history. So you can see, obviously, European culture is going to spread across the globe, and this includes things like languages and religion, especially indigenous populations, populations that are local to the area, were nearly wiped out by the European diseases and replaced with European cultures. So the estimates, especially for, say, the Americas, were that somewhere around 80% of the Native American population was wiped out, mostly through either, and let's not forget, it's a lot of disease, but also uh, they were just killed. Okay, and so let's see, European languages and Christianity obviously dominated the Western Hemisphere, and that again started with Columbus. And remember, Columbus wasn't the first to arrive in the Americas from Europe, but his voyage led the way for all the other countries. So definitely not the first, but anyway. This is a picture of what they call the Columbian Exchange. Columbian. And so this is showing just the transfer of goods from the Americas over to Europe. Okay, and so you can see these are all the things that came from the Americas: sweet potatoes, avocados, peanuts. You can read that for yourself. And then coming back, take note of this. This is coming back into the Americas, and obviously diseases were a huge thing, and along with livestock, the big five. Uh, and so this was, again, the Columbian Exchange, the flow of goods from one place to another. Sorry about that. Oops. And so when we talk about diffusion, and this is a concept we'll learn more about, but just diffusion means the spread of things. And so the diffusion of both goods and ideas, especially, don't forget that when people travel, so do their ideas. And so as we see migration, those ideas also spread along with it. So uh, now let's talk just a bit about forced migration. So forced migration is obviously just what it sounds like when a group of people is forced out of an area. And the biggest event of forced migration in history is the forced migration of Africans to the American continents through slavery. And so the estimates are somewhere between, where's my pen, 12 and a half to 40 million Africans were brought over. And this trip over in and of itself was a terrible thing. This is called the Middle Passage, if you've heard of that. And a lot of uh, captured, or we'll just say kidnapped. Africans died along the way, but this is by far the largest forced migration that we've had between the 15th and 19th centuries. Again, between 12.5 and 40 million people. All right, so when we talk about slavery, slavery does actually still exist today. It's not plantation based like we would think when we think of slavery in America, but there are some estimates that, somewhere between 21 million people, that's a UN estimate. Other people put the estimate at 46 million people are currently enslaved today. All right. Which is, either of those is a terrible number. And so some of the things that they are doing today would be to work in factories, mines, farms, sold for sex, trapped in debt, bondage, or they're just born into servitude. And so that is still happening today around the world. So it is definitely a concern. This would be, a mine, somebody who's enslaved working in a mine today. All right. So when we look at global migration throughout history, one of the things that's definitely changed is Europe used to be a place that everybody flowed from, and today Europe is a place where everybody flows to. A lot of the people are coming from the Middle East and South Asia, especially, if we're looking at the Middle East, Syria is a country that's experiencing civil war, Afghanistan, where war has been going on for quite a while, the U.S. and others. And so, Europe has become, because of location and opportunity, has been one of those destinations that people are going to a lot. Remember, though, the U.S. is still, in terms of numbers, the largest place for net migration. Now, the other thing to look at is something called chain migration. We've talked about that, and it does result in what they call ethnic enclaves. And so if you've ever been to like San Francisco and been to Chinatown, it is just areas within cities that are heavily culturally influenced by a certain group. So, it could be a Germantown, Little Havana, Little Haiti, Chinatown, things like that. So those would be called enclaves or ethnic enclaves. All right. Let's see. Some of the historical trends in the U.S., obviously 1500 to 1700, people came to North America, primarily England, France, Spain. Then from 1600s to 1800s, the forced migration of Africans. Once 1800 hit, 1808, the slave trade was made illegal. The importation, not slavery, was made illegal, but the importation. So in the U.S. All right, the 1800s basically was Northern and Western Europe. 1890 to 1914 was Southern and Eastern Europe. And then today's migration to the U.S. mostly comes from Latin America and Asia. All righty. So two big types of migration in the U.S., two big events. We've talked about the forced migration of slavery. These are voluntary migrations, and these are internal migrations. And so the first one is called the Great Migration, and the second one, the migration to the South, is called the Sun Belt migration. I have a loud dog, I'm sorry. So the Great Migration happened between 1916 and 1970, and this is when many African Americans moved from the South up to the North. Okay, and mostly there were two big factors. Remember, we talked about push factors and pull factors. So the push factor was to escape the discrimination and violence and the low economic opportunity. So in the South, we had the Jim Crow South. If you're familiar with that term, it was laws that were racially biased against African Americans. And so African Americans decided, let's move out of here and move up to the North. And the other big reason, the pull factor, were the jobs in the North. Okay. And so the push factor, again, low economic opportunity and discrimination. And the pull factor were the factory jobs that were increasing because of the wars. So so if you take a look at the dates, World War One, gets us in the 1918 era. World War II gets us in the 1940 time period, and then it continued up until around 1970. And so this is a depiction of the Great Migration. I'm sorry. Hang on. Sorry about that. So this is a depiction of the Great Migration from 1915 to 1970. All right, the migration to the south is a little bit different. Again, when migration happens, we need to figure out what are the push and pull factors. All right, so the push factors are the harsh winters in the north and a decline in jobs. And so remember, when we talk about migration, oftentimes the biggest driver of migration is economic opportunity. And so that is the same here. So uh, definitely an economic opportunity in the south, and the winters are pretty harsh. Now I will say the summers in Tucson are no picnic. But anyway, the pull factors, so things that are pulling them. After World War II, the government policy made moving anywhere easier, and so people decided, hey, we can go to the south now because they do have air conditioning. Because even though Tucson summers are not very pleasant, we do have air conditioning, and so we just stay inside a lot. And also, the defense industry, a lot of those manufacturing jobs are in the South. And so, again, you can see economic up here and economic down here. And so, and also climate for that. All right, so you can see this is the Sun Belt migration. So this is where people are leaving from. You can see here population change. So the purple, people fleeing New York, obviously. But take a look at the gains, all right, the dark green and the yellow. So we're a big gainer here. Nevada's a big gainer. So you can kind of get a sense of where people are leaving. All right. Let's see. This is a repeat of another slide of where people came from. This is a map showing the population center of the United States as the years go on. And so remember, we had this movement to the west, expansion into the west. And so the population center constantly kept moving west. And so now we are right around here in Missouri. It started off in Delaware. And so this just gives us a sense that, hey, the population is starting to move west. You can see the gold rush in the 1840s. And so that all those different factors kept pushing us to the west. And there's another example. Some intra-regional migration. Remember, intra means within a region. And so this would be an example of it. This would be whoops, not there. So let's take this as a city. So it used to be that people would predominantly live in the city, but it started to happen that people started moving from the city into the suburbs. And so that would be this flow out. All right. So we had some people moving from the suburb into the city. We had people moving from the city into the suburbs, and not a whole lot of people were outside of that. Obviously, we have people living on the outer parts. This is the rural area, but this is what we mean by intra-regional migration. So they're staying in the same general area, but they are moving within different spots. All right, and mostly it's not for economic reasons. Okay, this is for some type of lifestyle choice. Sometimes the city may deteriorate to where people don't want to live there. Sometimes the city gets really, really expensive and people can't live there. There can be different reasons, but they're staying in the same area, but just moving to places that they might can afford, or they might want to be close to a lot of things happening. Everybody has their preferences. All right, and then the last little bit, some of the migration policies and their consequences. Again, like we've talked about, in the U.S. and other countries, immigration tends to improve the economy. Okay, and there's debate about this, but not a whole lot. As a net, immigration has a net benefit. Now, one of the problems comes in when we look at things like cultural bias, and those fears of different cultures often arise when job opportunities become more scarce. So if you have a bad economy, that's generally when we see, in the U.S., that's generally when we see more of a fear of immigrants. And the idea is that immigrants will come in and take jobs. But as you saw in the last video, that's just not the case for the most part. All right, there's definitely a net benefit to having more immigration. So this is the last couple slides here. So policies that we have to encourage immigration. And so we'll just go over these real quick. We started out in the U.S. with not having a whole lot of policies restricting immigration. but that changed in the 1880s. We had something called the Chinese Exclusion Act, and that banned a whole group, a whole country of people. And so, and again, this is partly xenophobic and partly economic fears. All right, so when farmers needed laborers, and this is still true today, immigrants became welcome. We had something called the Homestead Act in 1862, oddly during the Civil War, which gave people who would come and settle areas in the West, the government gave them 160 acres, but they had to live on it for 5 years and improve the land. So that really drew people out because free land is a big deal. And so that was one of the policies that the U.S. had. Currently, the U.S. does give visas. Visa gives you a right to be in a place. To well-educated migrants, all right, we call these H-1B visas, and so we do have a lot of different policies for different groups of people. We have guest worker programs for work that might be hard or unpleasant to do. That can be challenging. Working on the farms would be an example of a guest worker program. Family reunification policies, which sponsors family members to come in. And there are a bunch of other ones. So quick migration for refugees in emergency situations. This is the one that's kind of controversial today. People coming in, and so if there's somebody fleeing and they can prove that they are in danger, then we take them in. And so it is how we process those people and how we listen to their what their story is, and that'll determine whether they are allowed in or not. And we'll watch some on that. And then policies discouraging immigration. All right, some people put education standards, say you have to have a certain education to come in. Some countries will restrict the kind of work that they can do. Some countries, most countries, have what they call a quota on immigration, and a quota is simply a limitation on the number of people that can come in. Again, some policies reflect xenophobia, which is this dislike of people that practice another culture. And so the U.S., for the most part, throughout its history, says we welcome people from other cultures, but that's not always been the smoothest transition when those cultures come in. There is going to be often some type of clash, and that happens, and we try to work through it. So anyway, the other big economic fear, again, is that immigrants will come in and take jobs, but we know that the more immigration there is, the more jobs there are, because those immigrants, they come in and they work, but they also buy stuff, and it's their economic activity in buying stuff that increases the number of jobs. All right, and so you can see here's the Chinese Exclusion Act. Japan limits their immigration a lot to try to preserve their cultural homogeneity, meaning they want to keep their culture similar. Okay, so the effects on the countries of origin. This is countries of migration. This is the countries that they're coming from. So one of the positive effects that we can say is that there is relief from overcrowding. All right, and so if there's a country with a very, very high population, and large net out migration could be helpful because of that. The negative thing here is that if the working age people leave, and again, it's mostly driven by economics, if they leave, who's left to work? All right. There's this phrase called the brain drain. This one I want to make sure you know. And the brain drain is when the educated people in a country go to another country for more opportunity. And the U.S. has been the recipient of this in a big way, because educated people in poorer parts of the world say, look, I can go to the United States and start a business and try and do good things and become wealthy there, instead of staying in this country where my chances are a lot smaller. And so that is the really significant and real downside of large out migrations of young educated people. All right, and here's just a little depiction of the brain drain. And then the effects on the receiving countries. So this is the countries that are receiving migrants. Immigration does make cultural contributions. The U.S. is very rich and diverse, and we have all of this awesome stuff because of that diversity. Foods, words, forms of entertainment, religious traditions. I mean, if you want it here in the U.S., it is probably somewhere in the U.S. because we are so diverse. And I think that diversity is definitely one of our strengths. The people that do migrate tend to be more motivated to get an education. They're motivated to work hard and to succeed, and so they are positive. Uh, they 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 are adding a net positive to the country they go to. They often open up small businesses. They're service oriented, but let's see. And the other thing that migrants do when they get to a country is they send remittances, and this is when, and this happens a lot in the U.S. Individuals will move to the U.S. and work, and then they'll take part of their paycheck and send it back home. Okay, and that's what a remittance is. It is money sent to family members still in the country of origin, which can account for nearly, and this is a significant number in some places, can account for nearly 40% of the income of some small countries. And so, if those people leave, if people migrate out of a country, and then they send money back, that's a positive, a positive for the country that they left. Leading countries of origin, obviously the United States and Saudi Arabia. Okay, those are the countries that send money out, where immigrants come in and then the immigrants send money back out. The leading countries as recipients are India and China. All righty. And so you can see here which countries send the most remittances. So by far, the U.S. is the biggest. This is 2014. So you can see on the map where the money flows to. So in the U.S., it's flowing back into Central and South America. You can see in Russia, it's coming down this way. So you can kind of get a sense. All righty. So that's it for this one. And we are done with Unit 2. So yeah, thanks for watching.